Hello, and welcome to episode 16. In this episode, we are going to be talking all about how to teach movement and yoga specifically, and the different ways that we can go about it. So, in general, there are three main approaches to teaching and cueing yoga. The first is visual or demonstrating. The second is verbal or speaking your cues. And the third is kinesthetic, which we'll talk more about as we get into things. So many teachers use a mix of all three of these techniques, but there is a trend, it seems, to consider where some teachers are considering verbal cueing to be superior to the other types of teaching. In fact, some teachers will even go so far as to teach only using verbal cueing with either minimal or no demonstration or physical touching. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have teachers who use all three styles. And oftentimes the reason that they're using all three styles is because they're trying to cater to the supposed three different types of learners: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. So the idea is that you don't necessarily know who's in the room in terms of what types of learners or what people's preferences for learning are in your class. So you want to use a mix of all three. So we are going to, over the course of this episode, question the idea that verbal cueing is superior to the other styles, and specifically that teaching without demonstrating is whether that's a good idea or not. And then we are also going to question the idea that we need to use three styles of teaching or cueing in order to accommodate the three types of learners in the room.
Perfect. I think that's so well laid out.
Thank you.
Thanks for that great introduction to this topic that I'm really excited for us to dive into today. And I feel like it just shows, it's interesting to think about how when you're thinking about teaching, and of course, this context here, we're talking about movement and kind of specifically yoga, but this goes for just all teaching in general, including classroom teaching and education in general.
Yeah, good point. This is
Right?
Yoga Meets Movement Science, but this is a hot topic in the education sphere, and it certainly applies to a fitness context too. Anybody who's teaching movement.
Totally. And so I just think it's interesting to think about how there are these different ways that we can teach in terms of like delivering information to people whom we're teaching. And we might think of those as like different teaching styles, I guess, or just, modes of information delivery. And then as learners on the other end of that, we have different ways that we can absorb information, or I guess you could say different styles of absorbing information. So I think as usual, with a lot of the stuff we talk about on our podcast, there are ways in which a lot of these processes are discussed that are kind of oversimplified. And maybe that just makes it easier to think about and easier to use in a practical day-to-day manner. But ultimately, sometimes we want to take a step back and look at whether those oversimplifications are really like serving the teachers and the students and what we're all trying to achieve. And,
Absolutely.
So
because we might be trying to be scientific and using a particular approach, and it may not be necessary, or the rationale behind it might not be totally accurate.
Totally. I think that's, I feel like that's common out there. And we kind of see trends like that a lot where things can often be claimed to be science-based, but then it's easy to throw that word around, right? Science is really complex, and I think sometimes it's easier to just cite that when it doesn't really hold up to or really live up to that claim. So we'll see. Maybe some of this teaching and learning, these ideas about how we teach and how we learn, maybe they might not be so science-based as people tend to claim. And maybe we could start off by just taking a look at that. So, this is a big conversation, but I think starting off with kind of the lay of the land a little bit around this idea of learning styles, and that there are different ways that we learn and absorb information. Do you want to, Travis, start us off by maybe just like a little introduction to learning style theory?
Yeah.
Super foundational.
Yeah. So, what was the guy's name who invented it? or who
Uh,
came up with this?
yeah. So I think the most popular model is Neil Fleming.
Do you know the year
Um,
by any chance?
well, what I read was that in general, the idea of learning styles was popularized like in the 1970s. I
Okay.
don't know if Neil Fleming's dates back to then. And there are a bunch of different models and
Yeah.
approaches, but I
Yeah.
think his is the most, right? The most popular.
Yeah. So 50 years ago, this dude, Neil, came up with this idea that people have
Travis.
preferred learning styles. And
Mm-hmm.
as we mentioned before, the three, sometimes it's three, sometimes it's four, sometimes it's a
10, who
different
knows?
list than I'm about to give. But basically, you might prefer learning through visual, like seeing things. You might prefer learning through verbal cues, so listening, and then you might prefer to learn through kinesthetics. And that in the context of yoga,
Mm-hmm.
the maybe the most relevant application would be through physical touch from the teacher. So
For
either an
kinesthetic, you
adjustment
mean?
or an assist. Yeah, from a kinesthetic standpoint. In a classroom context, that could just be like using your body or acting something out. But
Mm-hmm.
yoga is we're always using the body. So
Right.
so when we say kinesthetic from a yoga lens, we're really talking about receiving physical touch or
Or,
assist or an adjustment.
or do you think we can throw into the kinesthetic category
Oh
like
yeah.
things like yoga props
Yeah.
used in a way
Yeah,
to provide feedback?
constraining the environment or providing tactile feedback in some way that's
Right.
external to the body and that you can feel. So the idea, this guy Neil had this idea
Just
where
one
if you
day.
can diagnose or identify a person's preferred learning style, one of those three, then you could match the teaching to the preferred learning style, and that would lead to better learning outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So if Sally in the class says that she is a visual learner, then you'd want to make sure that you're demonstrating the poses for Sally. But if Bobby says that he's an auditory learner that or he learns best from verbal cueing, then you would want to make sure that you're speaking the cues,
Mm-hmm.
or narrating the sequence. And then if Joan says she's a kinesthetic learner, then you want to make sure that you're providing some sort of kinesthetic feedback for her as well. So, and again, the idea is we're going to match
Mm-hmm.
the teaching style to the individual to individualize the process, and that's going to lead to better learning outcomes, a better experience for the student than if you didn't go through this process. Basically, if there was a mismatch between
Uh-huh.
people's preferred styles and the style that you were teaching.
Right, right. That totally makes sense. And I think what you're describing as far as assessing like an individual student's quote learning style, that seems to me like if you as a yoga teacher or a movement teacher were really going to do that like per individual student, then maybe that would be more appropriate for something like a yoga private setting one-on-one.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
this in a group, you can't really practically do that.
right.
And I
Well,
think
okay. I saw something where in schools they were
Mhm.
adopting this practice. Maybe you saw this too. Maybe you sent this to me. They were having the kids wear shirts
Oh, wear shirts with
that
the
said
AVK. Oh my
V.
gosh.
Yeah. So there was a V for visual, or well, I don't know,
Hmm.
A for auditory, or K for kinesthetic.
To
And
label
so
these students as,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I guess you could do that in your class too, in your yoga
Right.
class. But to your point, uh, it would be most suitable for privates because you could actually ask the people what's your preferred learning style, and then you
Hmm.
know
And then cater your teaching to that. But in a
exactly.
group setting, since it's not really practical, we're not going to have our yoga students wear shirts. And also, a teacher in a public like yoga studio, their assemblage of students in any group class is always changing anyway.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the point is that there's this advice in the yoga world that because you never really know what type of learners you have in class, you should just always include all three, like all three
right,
types of
right.
teaching. Like you should always verbally cue and visually demo and either touch. And this does, I know, a whole other topic of touch, but we could maybe think of yoga props as another form of kinesthetic teaching. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea is just like, you got to include all three so that you cover all bases and
Yeah.
hit all the potential learners.
Yes. And so this theory has a lot of, well, it has a lot of surface appeal because it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like it makes sense.
Yeah, it
And the
intuitively,
that
yeah.
that approach of using all three styles um, is not. Let's start by saying that's not necessarily wrong. In fact, it's
Mm-hmm.
probably right, but
Mm-hmm.
it might not be for the reason that we think. So the there is a lot of, since 1970 whatever, when Neil came out with
Fleming.
this, Neil Fleming, probably Dr. Neil Fleming,
Right,
I don't know,
probably.
Dr. Fleming came out with this theory. I hope he doesn't listen to this. Well, I guess he can. He probably knows what
Yeah.
the state of the
He
research is
probably
on
does know
movement.
by now. Right, I would imagine.
Is he even alive?
Right.
Um, so there's been tons of research on this over the last 50 years. And do you want to spill the beans on what
Yeah,
the research
okay.
sort of concludes?
Yeah, I'll spill the beans. It's super well established by now in 2022. It's super well established that the idea of learning styles, that people have different learning styles, that they learn better through these different body senses, basically, that's a myth. And it's called a neuromyth, which I think is a really cool term that actually includes many other super common myths that probably most of our listeners can identify with having heard before. Like you only use 10% of your brain is like another neuromyth, or that people are left brained or right brained is another one, or the triune brain, which I've been talking about a little bit recently, the lizard brain, mammalian brain, and rational brain in these three parts. Anyway, these are all just different ways that the brain has been oversimplified and kind of chunked up into these just like different modules or something that have different psychological functions or sensory mode processing, like with sensory modes, kind of bringing it back more to the visual, auditory, kinesthetic learners.
Mm-hmm.
And it just turns out that the brain doesn't function that way. And really, I mean, really, like, to summarize it, it's like we typically use most of our brain most of the time. So it's not the case we're only using 10%. It's not the case that you're ever really only using like the visual cortex to create a perception of from visual information. Like, it's just so much more integrated than that in the brain. And when it comes down to like learning, say learning through a visual medium, like watching a physical demo or reading text or watching a slideshow, those are all examples of like visual learning. That it's just these senses are never really truly separate when it comes to how the brain receives and integrates information and then outputs an experience for you. So like the visual input is never really truly only isolated and visual. Like that's always combined with other inputs, especially once it's processed in the brain. So
Mm-hmm.
just these ideas that we can kind of separate this all out, and then that we can categorize and
Yeah.
label people as different types of learners.
And
Because, sorry, I was
go
just going
ahead.
to ask you. I was just going to ask you because they've done a lot of controlled experiments, right,
Yeah.
Travis, where
Yeah.
where they'll take people who have been labeled as certain types of learners and then teach them in those specific learning styles. And what happens in these experiments?
Nothing. No. So the learning outcomes are no better than if they hadn't labeled
Hmm.
them and individualized the instruction to the person's preference. So it just doesn't
Yeah.
work,
Yeah, so if
unfortunately.
you think that you're a visual learner, you might really have a preference. Like, people do have preferences. Like, you
Yeah.
can say, I prefer to learn through listening to a podcast, You could say that, but that doesn't mean that you do actually learn better that way. And we know from research that isn't the case, and we actually can learn through all these different
Yeah.
channels.
And that I think probably for a lot of listeners who are hearing this for the first time, that might be really surprising and really hard to
Hmm.
wrap one's head around, because you intuitively feel that, right? Like,
Hmm.
you might really really identify with one of those styles and not one of the others.
Right.
But from a research standpoint, that just doesn't seem to be the case. And
Right.
it's not it, nor is it the case that we just don't have the research yet. So that's another important thing to consider. It's that I think that
Right.
actually, so you said we like in 2022 we know this. I think we knew this in like 2006. Like
Yeah, we did. We did.
there
Yeah.
was a which is crazy because still to this day,
Hmm.
pedagogy, like teaching how to teach classes where they teach you how to teach, are proliferating those
These
neuromyths.
myths, all
Uh,
those ones I mentioned, I
yeah.
think.
So,
Hmm.
but the 15 years ago, we already knew that the research was conclusive enough that
Hmm.
this didn't work. There's been so much research on this, yet we still see this neuromyth continuing to be proselytized because for a few reasons, right? It's attractive, it makes intuitive sense. It's a nice simplification, but it turns out an oversimplification, and people are making money off of it.
Oh, right, because they're selling these methods, right? Like the learning style method or whatever. They sell them
Yeah,
to
like there
schools
are,
and
yeah, there are workshops that you can take that
hmm.
teach you how to teach to people's different learning styles. So people are, even if the research shows that this is not, this doesn't work, people still
Still
will. They're too invested in it for to acknowledge that it's not working.
totally. And it makes so much intuitive sense.
Yeah.
All of that. Yeah. Thanks so much for saying that. It's so true. Like we know that often day-to-day practice it lags really far behind insights from research. So research really may ever like debunk this. Like,
17 years.
yeah. Oh, that's the
That's the number
actual.
that's put out there. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we've known that learning styles are a neuromyth, if we've known that since 2006 or even before,
So
what is
next year
that?
we will be squared away.
That's so funny.
2023.
That's
Perfect.
perfect. It's coming up.
Yeah.
But another thing I wanted to point out was I also did read in reading up on the learning styles myth that there's some research to suggest that when you teach according to learning styles like that, like when you try to identify a student's style and then cater your mode of teaching to that style, can actually be counterproductive. And research has
Mm,
suggested because it can create like a self-limiting prophecy for that
yeah.
person. They're like, I'm a visual learner. That's the only way I know how to learn. So I'm not going to even try when it's these other,
Yeah.
and they
I
can,
go ahead.
yeah. So, oh, well, just that could limit them over the long term. It can kind of hold them back.
Yeah. So I had a mentor during my PhD training. She taught the pedagogy class for us
Oh,
doctoral
yeah.
students, and I asked her about this, and she said, "Yeah, there's actually you could make the argument that okay, people have these preferences, and you should deliberately teach them
Mm,
to their
mm-hmm.
non-preferred style to help
Right.
them grow and develop and try to break out of that mold that oh I can only learn one way."
100%. And I also did read that research has suggested that specifically like mixing up the way that you teaching in all three, like multimodal teaching, but that can be more successful as far as actually transferring knowledge. And that sometimes people can learn better when it's more challenging for them to learn. Like
Ooh,
when it's a learning style that they believe like that's not their preference. It's
interesting.
maybe they have to try harder or just adapt in a different way, and that might make them retain the information better than
There
just
you go.
always having it catered to the way that the teacher believes you learn best. So yeah,
Or
I think.
at the very least, so you mentioned multimodal. So
Hmm.
from a yoga example, that would be demonstrating and cueing simultaneously, as opposed to
Exactly.
just one or the other, or one then the other. So
Totally,
people
like,
can just
right.
integrate the information in more ways at the same time.
Hmm. Like all at once. And because that's how the brain processes information anyway, like it's never really separate in the brain anyway. So why not present things in like a mixed modal manner?
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be what like the evidence would support. So I guess, yeah. So thanks for bringing up yoga again to kind of bring all of this back to yoga, movement, fitness, things like that, because our like realm that we're operating in is the teaching of movement. Like we're movement teachers and we have movement students. So I guess what that would kind of bring us back to is, and we'll talk about this more later in this episode, but so we personally think it is a really great idea to use all modalities when teaching, all methods of delivering information when teaching yoga or movement, but not because of the learning style myth. So like we probably wouldn't recommend
Yeah.
saying the reason you should do this is because you may have these different types of learners in your class and you want to accommodate all of them, because that's a neuromyth.
Right. But we can still use all three, but not
Right.
for that reason.
Not for that reason.
Just because it's better. People learn better from all three.
When they're exactly. Yeah. So I think that's kind of a good way to present the learning styles myth in general, but also just how to think about delivering your teaching through these various ways that you could, like these various mediums, and how just in general a mix can be good, and it can be evidence-based. But we know
Yeah.
that in the yoga world, we do have this tendency, and this is taught in my experience in quite a few yoga teacher training programs, but there's this idea that verbal cueing, so teaching, I guess, in the auditory manner, is superior, specifically in my experience, specifically to physical demoing. So there's this idea that like you're a better yoga teacher if you can teach your whole class without demonstrating any pose. Like
It's
it really is.
perplexing to me that this is even a thing.
I know.
Because I just never heard of it in a fitness context.
Right. So fitness being kind of separate from yoga, you mean?
Right. Yeah.
Right. In the fitness world, that doesn't seem to be a thing, right? Like that's not emphasized. Like you should only talk
No,
people through things.
it's like we're, as personal trainers, we're always taught to demonstrate and talk people through things. It just,
Right.
why would you, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And then a video or whatever, like a visual, why would you waste your time and effort trying to use 1,000,000 words to describe something when you can show somebody 2 squats and then they get it?
Totally. Like it can it can be that simple, maybe. I don't know if simple is the best word, but just it doesn't have to be like we don't have to go out of our way to make
Why
things.
would we put more, why would we subject ourselves to a less efficient and more cumbersome way of doing things? Like, how does
Right.
that make us better or the experience better for the students?
Well, maybe we could. I know we've kind
Let's
of
start over.
yeah, we've let our
Before I
bias
get so
come out.
irate at this
Exactly.
idea.
We've kind of revealed our bias. Maybe we could take a step back and try to look at this a little more
All
objectively.
right. I'll be
We
the
have
person who who thinks this idea is a good idea, and you be the person who doesn't, and then
Okay, cool.
no, wait, I don't think I can do it.
You can't role play that. Okay. Well,
All right, you be the person who likes the idea. I'll be the person who doesn't, and then we'll go.
Okay, I love it.
Okay.
I'll step in and out of this role a little bit because maybe I'll add some other commentary, not as this person. But let's say, okay, so I'm teaching a yoga teacher training, and I'm teaching my trainees that verbal cueing is best, and whenever possible, you should teach via verbal, and you should not demonstrate,
Perfect.
and that you're a better teacher if that's what you do. So that's what I think, and that's what I teach in my teacher training. And
am I in the teacher training?
Yeah, you're.
And I have these really iconoclastic beliefs. Is that the correct word? We'll go with it. I disagree, and I'm gonna be that.
I think it is iconoclast. That's a great word.
Okay, I'm gonna be the pesky student who's like,
totally
Jenny, I don't agree. Okay.
And you're gonna like annoy me, and I'm gonna be like, why are you questioning me in the middle of this? But anyway, so reason number one that verbal cueing is superior to the other modes of teaching. Well, reason number one is that it's kind of a cop-out for the teacher if you just demo, because it's a lot easier to demo a pose and have people just kind of quote copy what you do. They just watch what you do and then they do it, and that's just really easy for you as a teacher. Like you can do down dog. Yeah. I think it's lazy if you just, it's harder for you as the teacher. Like you have to work more and potentially grow more if you only verbally say it out loud. So I think it's kind of a cop out, and it makes lazy teachers if we're physically demoing. So don't demo, Travis.
Okay, got it. Wait, I guess I'll hold my critiques till the end.
Oh, really? Okay, so you're not going to argue with me point by point. Okay, then I'll just lay out all the reasons. Okay. So then another one is that if you demo, you're not paying attention to your students. If you demo, you're not, like as a teacher, you're not looking at them. You're not paying attention to what they're doing because you're doing this physical demo. And so a better teacher would be one who didn't demo and was only talking, because then you could really watch your students. So there's that.
Mhm.
And physical demoing is sometimes said to, it pulls your students out of their practice. Like they should stay
Oh yeah.
really inward focused and in this meditative focus on their mat, in their body. And if you're demoing and you're asking them to like look at you at the front of the room, then that's pulling them out of their practice. And when you demo, you're using your body as a teacher. And that can be bad for the body to just like overuse like
Oh
that,
yeah.
like doing all these
Wear
yoga
and tear.
poses. Wear and tear on the body, like that's not good. It's better if you just walk around or just sit there or something. But going in and out of yoga poses is wear and tear on the
It's
body.
dangerous. Yeah.
hmm and I think I have one more reason why you should not demonstrate, because and that's that if you demonstrate poses, you'll give your students the idea that yoga is all about aesthetics, or like what poses look like. That's like portraying that. So for all of those reasons and more, it's just a superior method of teaching to only speak, to only verbally cue. And I know we also have the kinesthetic side of it. This is kind of a little bit just
Just
comparing the
one
demoing
versus the
versus
other.
that.
Yeah.
So what do you think, yoga teacher training student Travis?
I think that is bollocks.
Really?
I do. And I'm sorry,
Why are you
yoga teacher
questioning me?
Jenny. It just doesn't make sense to me because of a lot of reasons. So
Why in the
I
world? I just gave you so many good reasons.
so many. Yeah. So, well, first of all, like I said, I think that it's silly to try to create more work for yourself when you have this efficient means of teaching people through demonstration, that you just don't have to create unnecessary work for yourself when it's easier to demonstrate than trying to explain something using your words, and it takes longer and all that.
Are you saying like physical demonstrating is like maybe can be more efficient than
Yeah.
verbally cueing? So that actually could be a plus. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Because I want to flip that script and take that same point and say that visual cueing makes you a lazy teacher, but you're saying it's just more efficient and that's good?
That's what I'm saying.
I'll have to mull that one over.
Okay. Point number 2. What was your second point?
That if we're demoing, we're not paying attention to our students. I think that was the second
so that's more of like I don't think that's a issue with demoing. I think that's an issue with teaching, is that, yeah, you have to pay attention to your students while you're demoing. And that's a skill, right? It's not,
Right, that's
and
a
it's
skill.
certainly not trivial to be able to do that at the same time. But I feel like you could just as easily not be paying attention if you were like thinking really hard about how to say the thing. Like devoting all of your cognitive energy to how am I going to explain this with my words without demoing, that I can't pay attention to what's going on in the room in front of me. So it doesn't seem to be, I mean, I get logistically, well, if you're in down dog, then, and you're like having to turn your head, but just, you got to position yourself in such a way that you can see people, but also like, I don't know how much I can't speak to this, but how much are you, as you're demonstrating, how much are you, or as you're cueing, how much is what's happening in the room affecting what you're saying? I mean, I guess it is.
I think this gets a little complex, because there are different types of situations. And also, are we talking about a yoga teacher demoing like an occasional pose in the class, or are we talking about a yoga teacher staying on their mat the whole time and doing the entire class?
Yeah, and I don't think that we're advocating for that at all. I think we're saying use the thing. Well, and actually, this is a really important overall. So use the teaching style that is the best in that moment
for what you're teaching.
Yes. So, and that
100%.
applies to in an education classroom. If I'm teaching poetry, we're going to read the poem. If I'm teaching sculpture, we're going to use our hands to, I don't know.
No, totally.
But so in the moment where you're teaching the sequence, use whichever one makes the most sense. So if in that moment you do need to have your eyes on the people, then you can't be demoing something where you're putting yourself in a position where you can't have your eyes on the people. but that's
Mm-hmm.
not all the time. So
No.
it's a trade-off, right? Yeah, it might be a little bit harder to see what's going on in the room if you're demoing. So, okay, don't demo for 75 minutes straight and not look at the class. But at
Yeah,
the same time,
exactly.
don't put yourself out by forcing yourself not to demo anything at
Mm-hmm.
all when it would be more convenient to demo it.
100. I think it's really stated that really well. Like there's nuance, right? And none of these are black or white rules. But maybe just looking at it from yeah, a more nuanced place and kind of seeing where there can be exceptions to the rule.
Yeah. So then the next one was, oh, it takes students out of their practice if they are watching you demonstrate.
Yeah.
Doesn't it take students out of their practice if they're listening to you? How is that any different? It's just a
I
different
love
sense,
that you
but is
said that.
one
Listening is
stronger? Like,
auditory and watching is visual. Does it take
yeah.
students out of their practice if you have them push into a block and then say, what does it feel like as you push into that block? Like this is, I'm saying a kinesthetic example now, or it's actually like
Mm-hmm.
a tactile example, but now you're asking them to feel like their relation to this external object. Isn't that taking them out of their practice? I mean, couldn't all these
Yeah.
sensory inputs coming in at the same time?
Yeah. So to
My,
me, it's like, okay, I get it. If the student has to crane their neck and look up to see what you're doing while they're
right,
doing
right.
something, I could see that like literally taking somebody out of their practice. But I think that it's kind of like for a beginner, it's kind of necessary, and they're gonna not be able to
Yeah,
be in their practice as much because they do have to learn and they do
they
have
have
to
to
look.
learn.
And
Hmm.
so somebody who's more experienced can maybe, so if you're the teacher and you're demoing and queuing at the same time, the student can decide for themselves whether to take themselves out of their practice, quote unquote, to look and see what's going on, and somebody who's more experienced can opt just to
Right.
listen. But if you don't, if you're not demoing, then the person who doesn't know what's going on doesn't even have anything to look at for help.
And then would they
And
be in their
I've
practice or would
experienced
they
that.
be,
Yeah,
wouldn't that
yeah.
take
So
them out of their practice?
yeah, if they don't know what they're doing and then they have no quick
Hmm.
reference to see,
Totally,
I've
then they're
certainly
out of their practice
experienced that as a
anyway.
student. I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing? And then I look up and the teacher's not maybe not doing anything, not doing
Right.
anything, but
Yeah,
not
right.
demoing. And then I look at somebody else in the room to see what they're doing. Well, who knows if they're doing it right?
That's so true. And plus you're still looking at someone else. So is that taking you out of your practice by this rationale?
Yeah,
I don't know. I just think that claim is oversimplified and makes
yeah,
assumptions.
yeah. So I think maybe some students would feel that way, but it's also their
Hmm.
choice. Unless you're, as the teacher,
Hmm.
saying, "Look at me." But then if you are, that would probably be a moment of stillness for the student.
Hmm.
I'm going to
They'd
demonstrate,
stop
then
their
you're going to
practice.
do,
Yeah.
as opposed to look at me while you're doing this thing.
I
I don't know.
think
I
you're
just don't
right.
hear, I don't experience teachers doing that
I
in a
think
way that takes, yeah,
a skilled teacher, an experienced teacher, they kind of know when to pepper in and how to coordinate their demos so that they are, seamlessly integrated into the class without being like distracting and they're being more helpful, I guess, to the
yeah,
to the overall class.
yeah. Okay. So the
You're
next point, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm pretending to be the teacher trainer again. I'm just saying that you're starting to convince me that maybe some of my points, could be questioned.
No,
And on the surface,
you wouldn't be swayed.
well,
You
let's
have
see.
to,
Don't
you have to hold on to your ground and be the
Oh, I
authority.
have to be
Can't
obstinate. Okay.
Yeah, you can't let the teacher, the teacher training student, get one
Right.
up on you.
Well, you've tried to knock my opinion down with a few different reasons, but you haven't yet. I'm going to stick to my original opinion. I still
Yeah,
have one or two more reasons I said, right?
yeah. So, uh, it's giving this. It's overemphasizing the aesthetics of the
Oh,
pose.
yeah. When you demonstrate.
Yeah, that is only true if you let it be true. So that's
Hmm.
purely based on the narrative that you're ascribing to your demonstration. So if you say, make sure it looks like this, then yeah, you're creating some picture for the student of what it's supposed to look like. But all you have to say is, just so you know, yours isn't necessarily going to look like mine. Or it can look many different ways. So it's not automatically that if I
Hmm.
demonstrate, I'm putting the aesthetic value of the pose on a pedestal. It's
Hmm.
it could do that if you allow it, but or if you
That's
make it
so
that way,
true.
but I don't think it automatically makes it that way. And I think it's easy enough to make it not that way.
100%. Isn't it all about kind of like the narrative that you're kind of couching everything in when you're in how you're presenting it, and just your approach to your style of yoga in general and the way you're presenting that to your students? You can certainly make it be all about aesthetics and like photos for Instagram, or you could make it be about something else, but we're still on the mat doing movements. And when you're teaching and communicating about movement, um, showing people visually can be a part of that without it having to necessarily be like, it's all about what it looks like.
Right. Yeah. So you would say yours isn't necessarily going to look like mine, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Or maybe you can do the pose a few different ways, and then
Right?
that
You as the
gives
teacher,
this,
you mean?
yeah, then the student can even see, oh, mine might look more like this or more like that.
100%. Yeah, so it's kind of, yeah, it's like in how you present it, and you can be in charge of how that comes across, like what type of messaging. But it doesn't mean that just demonstrating in and of itself isn't inherently making it about aesthetics, right?
Yeah. And I think it's just, especially for a beginner, somebody who's never been in the room, and you're trying to walk somebody through verbally a down dog,
Mhm.
let's say, like it's going to be
Mhm.
so much easier for that person to see it and hear it than just to hear it.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I've stepped out of my role as the teacher
Oh,
trainer
yeah.
and
Yeah.
saying I agree with you,
That's,
but I have to step back in. We have one more reason that I
yes.
brought up about why verbal cueing
Yes.
is better. And that's because we just need to address this and then we can move on. It's because if you physically demonstrate when teaching, you'll wear and tear on your body. It's like too much movement for the teacher. So you'll protect your body by not doing yoga poses when you teach. That's my last point, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. So if you're teaching 14 classes a day,
Yeah.
sure, that's going to be really tough on your body, right? If and I know there are people, maybe 14 is a stretch, but I know there are people who
Right, that's not
teach
really
a
possible.
ton of classes.
For sure.
And
Like 20
that,
a week or something like that.
yeah, and that would be, I could imagine that being really hard.
For sure, to
But
do all of that yoga,
yeah,
yeah.
but you can't automatically say that that's going to be too much for the person, because if they've this is like a conversation that we always have, if they've built up to that over time and they
Yep,
are able to tolerate that, then that's fine for them. Not
yep.
everybody would be able to step into teaching 20 classes a week and being okay. So it could be too
Mhm.
much for a given individual, but you can't make a blanket statement that by physically demoing poses, that's going to be too hard on our bodies as
Mhm.
teachers.
On
So we
everyone's
should opt.
bodies.
Yeah, because everybody's body is different. And then the other side of that argument was like, well, if you just occasionally demo and you're not like properly warmed up for that, and
Mhm.
I get that. I think that's fair to say. If didn't, if you were just walking around, or maybe you were just standing still and then you like fall back into a back bend
Yeah,
um,
right?
after being relatively not warmed up, maybe
Mhm.
that's not going to work out so well for everybody. I mean, it might work out fine for
Right,
some
some
people.
teachers may be well
Some people,
adapted,
yeah,
but a lot
some
of people,
people
that's a lot.
can just do that. For other people, that's not going to work so well. So it's
It's kind
uh
of relative, right? Like
but
within
it's taking,
reason.
yeah, it has to be within reason. It's taking it too far to say this is gonna be wear and tear. It could just be like that's the 2 hours of movement that you get a day,
Mhm.
and that's
Mhm.
great. But
100,
I don't
like
know
what
if
it
if you have your own 2 hour movement practice outside of your teaching, and then now you're talking about doing 4 hours 7 days a week. That could be
Mhm.
a lot for people.
Right. So maybe what could be really helpful is for people to build up the experience to just be able to teach in a multitude of different ways. And then they can choose to kind of fall into the modality that they want to teach in that one month. If they're feeling tired on a particular day, maybe they
Yeah.
just they walk around more and they don't
Yeah.
do so many
So
poses.
I think it's fair to take that into consideration of if you're teaching a ton of classes every week or you're teaching a ton of classes
Hmm.
that day. Yeah, you might want to save some energy for later or give yourself a little bit of a break by opting for a little, like going a little bit more towards verbal than visual. But
Right.
it's way too extreme to say, oh well, we have to save our bodies, so we're going to make it harder for ourselves, and we're going to never demonstrate.
I totally agree with you. Would you say that maybe making the blanket statement that when yoga teachers demo, it's potentially creating wear and tear and can be bad for their bodies? Would you say that that could be fear mongering?
I think so. Because it's all about how you conceptualize it. One
Right.
person could say, well, that's a lot of wear and tear, and the other person could say, that's great that they're getting a lot of movement.
Exactly. They're building their body up. They're like increasing their capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's super contextual, I think, in general, whenever we just blanket statements in general, like this applies to everyone in all cases, are just kind of not helpful. So yeah, I think we've explained how that's a nuanced point as well. So I'm going to step back into being the yoga teacher trainer who was advocating for verbal cueing being better. And I'm going to say, Travis, can you leave my teacher training? You're a problem student and you're just going to
I'm
make this hard for
fired.
me. You
Do I get my money
iconoclast.
back or it's
We'll
done
talk
now?
about that later.
Okay.
But even though it's resistant and hard for me for you to bring up these points in the middle of this training, you still said them and I still heard them, and it may be something that I'll internalize and think about with a little more time. And maybe I'll hear these ideas from other people, and over time, belief change is such a hard thing, and generally just one person saying one thing, like that's not how it happens. But maybe an accumulation of ideas and inputs over time. So maybe you as this iconoclast maybe made me uncomfortable in the moment, and I'm kind of holding up I'm crossing my arms across my chest and just like, I don't want to hear about this. But maybe with some time, as things settle in and I hear more and learn more, maybe I'll start to shift. And it maybe all started with you being the iconoclast in my
I
program.
won't hold my breath.
That's me being positive on this. But can we flip the script a little bit now? I'm not the teacher trainer anymore. So
Okay.
I'm back to beat me. So we just kind of went over a lot of the reasons often given for why verbal cueing is superior, and better yoga teachers only verbally cue and they minimize their physical demoing. So we talked about why that's often justified. Now can we kind of flip the script and look at why teaching only using verbal cues, why that actually could be limiting? Like, what are some reasons for why it might be less than optimal to minimize physical demoing and only verbally teach?
Let's do that.
Okay. And I don't think we don't have to role play a yoga teacher training now.
Okay,
I'll think
we'll
about
both
it,
be on
but
the same page.
yeah, let's be on the same page. Exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, we kind of had a list of reasons to talk about for how actually taking that on, could be a little limiting. And the first reason on the list that I actually personally find to be a super fascinating reason is something called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons. Travis, have you heard about mirror neurons before?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I wondered if like in your motor learning, stuff that you've learned and taught, but maybe not. I am no expert, but I have read up on them a bit, and we shouldn't take too much time to talk about it here in this conversation, but I think it's pertinent and relevant to this. So basically, mirror neurons are a relatively recent discovery. They were discovered like 20 years ago or so. And they're these neurons that we have in our brain that activate both when you perform a movement and when you watch someone else perform that same movement. Are you remembering you have heard of these before?
Yeah, because of graded motor imagery.
Yes, because of motor imagery. Yes, I was going to talk about that too. Yeah. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, these specialized neurons, and they were discovered in monkeys, but now they've also been discovered in humans, and they activate both when you do a specific movement, like, I don't know, let's say shoot a basketball into a basket. I don't know. You have certain neurons that will activate to coordinate that motor program. But if you were to stand there and watch someone else shooting a basketball into the basket, those same neurons, those mirror neurons in your brain, they like mirror what the person is doing, and they will activate.
Isn't it also true that if you imagine or think about or visualize doing the movement yourself, which isn't as relevant to this conversation, but that activates the same circuitry?
Yes, so that's my understanding.
You can practice just by thinking.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I think, I think we've talked about, or you've mentioned before, Travis, that like in athletic events, don't coaches often coach athletes to like visualize yourself doing the movement first and then do it? They don't always, but they should.
Yeah, there's probably some taboo. It's that's this visualization or mental
Yeah.
imagery. It's a sports psych intervention, or it's something that you can do to enhance your performance, and we have
Right.
research that shows that. But I think that there's a little bit of taboo. I think some people are not so
Oh.
inclined to do that, but I think that, so to your point, coaches should employ these techniques, but whether
Mhm.
they do or not, I don't know.
Interesting. But research has shown that they can be effective. So both imagining the movement, visualizing it, fires these same mirror neurons that watching someone else do the same movement will also fire. That will also fire when you yourself do the actual movement. It's like really cool stuff, I feel like.
Is the idea of doing something on one side and then doing it on the other, does that have anything, is
So
that related?
I'd like to know that, and that's actually one of my outstanding questions. But to me, it seems like yes. Like
I think
you mean
it, well,
the
especially with
crossover effect?
with mirror therapy, which is a bit
Hmm.
of a particular thing. But if you have a deficit, like an injury in your hand, let's say, you can put a mirror kind of bisecting yourself, so you could
Hmm.
watch yourself doing the thing with your unaffected hand, and it looks to you as you're looking in the mirror that the affected side is doing it, and that can actually have
Hmm.
favorable benefits from a functional or pain standpoint.
Right, like for rehab or
Yeah.
yeah, that's super cool. To me, that seems along the same lines, but I don't know if that's technically mirror neurons or not. Also, I would like to just volunteer that because they are such a relatively recent discovery. I also have read that it's a little controversial about mirror neurons. That some scientists are, it's like when something is new, people get really excited about it, and then they kind of want to jump to conclusions
Like the
around.
learning styles.
Yeah, like the learning styles, exactly. So I think there's some hesitance among some scientists to be like, mirror neurons do all these things.
Okay.
But other people, like for example, okay. So for example, I know there's research, and I was reading up on some of it for this episode. Research on something called observational motor learning. So it's been shown in research that like if you want to teach someone, say a sport task or a sport skill, they will perform better and they learn it better if they both observe the movement being done and they practice it, as compared to just having them practice it. So like their
Mm-hmm.
performance is enhanced if they also watch someone doing it and they practice it.
Cool.
And so what I've been seeing is it seems like the researchers are postulating that now that we know about mirror neurons seem to explain that phenomenon that's already been known about for a while. Like they
Okay.
may explain why. So I think it's kind of like that. It's like they may be why. It looks like maybe those are why these things happen, but maybe it's not like totally certain yet. But
Okay.
regardless, it's cool. And they've also been proposed to be play a role in things like empathy, like how we can empathize with someone else, and also play a role in our ability to detect other people's intentions when they're doing something. Like when
Wow.
they're doing a certain movement, like our mirror neurons help us inform us. And that can come into like sport specific skills, like on a team sport, your ability to
Mm-hmm.
perceive what your opponents are doing or what they're planning on doing
Yep.
can, it seems like mirror neurons may play a role in that. So it's super cool. And if we bring that back to our yoga and movement teaching conversation, to me, it just seems like you're potentially leaving a learning pathway off the table completely if you are
Yeah.
not including demos. I mean, like mirror neurons are so cool. And it seems like a way students instantly would just learn. They'd watch you do the movement and they would internalize that in their brain. And that should help them then do the movement better. Do you think?
I think so.
Yeah. That's one reason why actually physically demonstrating could be really cool, in addition to all the other reasons, like it's an efficient means of teaching and everything else.
Yeah. Well, and it goes
Uh,
back to our multimodal idea
yes,
of teaching.
exactly. And this just may be one reason that helps support that or helps
Mm-hmm.
explain why
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
multimodal teaching can be so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So mirror neurons are rad. I was thinking maybe sometime in the future we could even do an episode on them, just that, because I think there's a lot there on just what they might suggest about teaching and movement in general. So okay, a couple other reasons, right, why we might question that verbal cueing is the best. A couple other reasons. Um, one thing I would ask this question: do you think, in your experience, Travis, like if you're in a yoga
Mm-hmm.
class, do you think that if the teacher does some of the yoga practice with the class, do you think that helps create more of a communal community vibe, like that teachers and
Totally.
students are kind of all in this together, versus the teacher either just sitting there or only walking around and only narrating it, which that maybe in your is as a student experiencing it, maybe it sets up more of that power dynamic between that's the teacher and the student.
Yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
I've had classes where the teacher sets up a mat in the front and like
Mm-hmm.
that's her home base. I've also had classes where the teacher walks around and will
Mm-hmm.
sometimes demo on the side
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or the front, which makes sense, right? Like if everybody's side
Totally.
facing, then the
Yeah, you
teacher's
go
just
over to the
going over
side.
to the side and doing the thing. Um, yeah, I think that's nice. I think that if the teacher like had their hands tied behind their back and said, "I'm not," or maybe they wouldn't say it, but like, "I'm not demonstrating anything for you at all." Like,
Right.
then
I'm
yeah,
going to do it all
that
with my words.
yeah, it's
Then you
totally
might
good.
feel like that's a little less, I don't know. I mean, and I'm just making the assumption that like more of a communal vibe might be preferred, but it does seem like there's a lot of dialogue in the yoga community these days about teachers not really elevating themselves up on a pedestal or creating like a potentially non-optimal power dynamic between teacher and student. So I just wonder if, the teacher be like, I'm in this with you, I'm doing this,
Yeah.
at
Oh
least
well,
some of it.
especially like you're telling me that I need to hold chair pose for 30
Yes,
seconds,
such a good
and
example.
if you're doing it with me, although then sometimes I'm like, damn it, why is it so hard for me, and why is it so easy for the
They're
teacher?
just talking as they're doing it.
Yeah,
But
that's a bit
added
discouraging,
layer.
but I think that's a me thing.
Yeah. I know I think I see what you're saying. But in general, it's like they're in it with you,
Yeah,
and that's like kind of
I like that.
yeah, yeah. I do too. I do too. And again, as I think we've already spoken to, of course it's all like a spectrum. And there's one thing is like jumping into a yoga pose, a hard pose while people are doing it to kind of, I'm in here with you. But then there's the example of a teacher being on their mat the entire practice and, doing the whole class with everybody. And that's kind of
Yeah, I think
different.
that's probably like a very beginner
Hmm.
teacher, right? Like you could
I think so.
imagine that the teacher feels the need. They're new and they
Hmm.
feel the need to demo the whole thing. And I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if that would bother me or not. I guess it would make me. I guess having the teacher walk around the room makes me feel like they're a bit more. Um, there's the opportunity for them to notice things going on in the room versus if they're just on
Yeah.
their mat the whole time.
The whole time. Yeah.
So that's like what I perceive.
That's really helpful to hear. And I agree. And I think actually, if we get too much into that, that's kind of a different topic in my mind.
Yeah, yeah,
Teaching
yeah.
methodology in general. But I do think like when I was a newer yoga teacher, it was certainly easier to just do the practice with everyone. And then I could think of what to say when I'm in the pose. It reminded me of,
Oh
I should
yeah,
say this when I'm in this pose. But
yeah.
then,
Well, that's the easy way out.
yeah, right. But I mean, you mean as far as like cueing or whatever.
Yeah, you're making you're using your own experience to figure out what to say.
Right.
That's just like lazy.
That teacher's not doing the work.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
should do the sequence ahead of time so you know what to say so that when you get to the moment you just like you already got it.
Right, right. So to me, I think that's a little separate and different from this conversation about like learning styles and teaching styles. But I guess just to throw out that there is a continuum. And, there's being on your mat and never leaving it and physically demonstrating everything. And then there's this
Yeah.
other side, which is I'm not going to physically demonstrate anything. I don't even have a mat out. And a lot of teacher training
Yeah.
programs say don't even put a mat out so that you can't, like, you're not tempted to demo, you know? So anyway, it's kind of a different conversation,
Yeah.
but
But
just this idea that
it's clearly related and we're
mhm,
basically advocating as always that neither extreme makes
exactly,
sense.
yeah, maybe neither extreme is like optimal or what
Yeah.
in like most cases. Yeah, you want to kind of do them all. A couple other points for why only teaching verbally might be less than optimal are what if you have people in your class who are hard of hearing? What if you have people in your class for whom English, I'm assuming that we're teaching in English and maybe we're not, but just what if you have people in your class for whom the language you're teaching your class in is not their first language? And
Hmm.
so just hearing the words, it might create a barrier or a challenge for them. So in that sense, perhaps including multimodal means of teaching might be more inclusive or accessible if you're thinking about it that way. Do you think so?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So like um, visually demoing could be helpful in those cases so that people who maybe can't understand you very well and your words very well would still understand what you're asking them to do.
Hmm.
So, so yeah, I think that seems like a pretty thorough look at, the reasons generally offered for why verbal cueing is superior and makes you a better teacher. And then maybe some of these other reasons on the other side, where if you only verbally teach, why that may be a little limiting and maybe not so optimal, that there could be advantages to incorporating more. Do you have any other thoughts on kind of on that, Travis?
Not from the yoga standpoint, but could we speak to the fitness
Yes,
context?
I would love to.
As a so I mentioned that when I learned to be a personal trainer, my mentor, it was okay. You're always going to demonstrate, right? Especially when you're teaching someone something new. You're going to demonstrate. You'll show the right way to do it, then you'll show the wrong way to do it, and then you'll show the right way to do it again. That's like the
Hmm.
quintessential demonstration. And all the while you're talking through it at the same time. And so from that standpoint, like that is the gold standard of how you should teach people, especially new movements, or if they need a refresher, let's say. It would be lazy of me to not demonstrate, which is the exact opposite
That
of
is
what
the
you
opposite
described, where
in the
it's
yoga world.
lazy, yeah, to demonstrate because it's too easy. So for me, like if I'm working with a client who I've been working with for a long time and they know what a rear foot elevated split squat is, then
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say, grab your dumbbell. We're going to do rear foot elevated split squats because I don't need to show them every time. But
Right.
also maybe I don't feel like doing rear foot elevated split squats. So I'm just going to walk them through it. And sometimes like when I'm teaching online it's hard to like show someone something
Right.
in the
Right.
space that I have with the camera and all of that. And so or I don't feel like standing up and I am being lazy and it'll take me a minute to explain like how to do a bird dog when I could have just gotten on the floor and in 5 seconds shown them what I meant, right?
Right.
Uh, so it's funny that it's the opposite in my context versus a yoga context.
That really is funny. Yeah, that like not demoing is kind of like the lazy way to go. I was going to say when I was thinking about you as a personal trainer or anyone as a personal trainer um, training people, I kind of had this assumption that it might not be best to demo everything just because in a personal training context people are actually strength training and they're using more load versus like in the yoga world which it's low load and not necessarily like strength
Right.
training more.
So
So I just
the
want,
argument
yeah.
that you could be putting
Hmm.
excessive wear and tear
Yeah.
might possibly be plausible when you're talking about doing something with heavy weights versus, well,
Right.
body weight exercise. Like that's probably not going to put a lot of wear and tear on you. So what I would say to that is that when we're talking about demonstrating, the good reps, the bad reps, and the good reps, you only necessarily need to do like 5 reps,
Hmm.
and you can do it with a very lightweight. It doesn't have to
Totally.
be, oh, let me show you exactly how this is going to look for the working weight that you're going to do where you're exerting all out. It could
Hmm.
be, okay, I'm going to grab something. You're going to use something heavy, but I'm going to grab something light because it's
Hmm.
not my training session. I'm just demonstrating for you. And you could imagine what it looks like with a much heavier weight. Or maybe
Right.
in some contexts, like I'm very strong, and so I could use the weight that you're using, but it would be relatively light for me. But yeah, I wouldn't put 500 pounds on my back. Well, I would
Yeah.
never put 500 pounds on my back. Even if I could put 500 pounds on my back, I wouldn't do that for the demonstration purposes.
Right, 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 right. You wouldn't demonstrate with like your full max that you could do, but you would demonstrate enough to get the point across. Like, this is what I'm wanting
Yeah,
to do.
yeah. So that was the funny thing that my mentor would say. He would say, you only need to be able to do 2 good reps.
That's right. Because
So
they only
so
need
you
to see a
you could
couple.
yeah, you could be like lousy at a particular exercise, but as long as you can fake a couple of good reps before like your form goes to hell, then
Mm-hmm.
that's enough.
Right, 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 right. Well, thank you so much for sharing and explaining that. I think it's really interesting to just hear how, how these different ways of teaching movement are different in these different fields. I wonder why, like I just, as you were talking, I was just kind of wondering, like, why is it different between why in the yoga world do we have this idea that demoing is lazy and
I
it's,
wonder, and maybe we should poll your audience and
oh, that's a
see
great idea.
what their what's the breakdown of people who have heard these beliefs or
Hmm.
actually these beliefs resonate with them.
Right. And like, why do they hold these beliefs? And also on the flip side, like, do people think it's important that we teach all three? Teach all three: visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And if they do believe that, why? And I bet a lot of people would say, well, it's because of the
Yeah.
learning styles.
So
And we know that's
maybe we can do that, and then we can release that information as an addendum.
yeah, I know. It's something we could have and should have thought of it maybe before, but it'll still be interesting to find out. Maybe we could maybe in our next episode just really quickly report on it, like in the beginning. But maybe that's not a good idea.
We'll
We'll
find
see.
out. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I just wonder why. I wonder why there's this difference, between movement modalities.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely clear that amongst so many different realms where things are taught, whether it's movement and it's what you do and what I do, or whether it's classroom teaching in a more like traditional education context, and also just in general, these ideas about the way learning and teaching works and about the way the brain works and neuromyths and how easily they and widespread they populate, and then how hard it can be to dislodge and change those beliefs once they're kind of set in. It's kind of a lot to think about. We can hone in and look closely, like in our realm of like yoga, movement, fitness. But if you take a step back, it's kind of these greater tendencies.
Yeah. And I think people are well intentioned, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you think that
Mm-hmm.
you're doing something good by catering to people's learning styles, only to find out that from this podcast that that's a bunch of baloney. But it's again, people are. It's never misintentioned. That's not a word, but
Oh, right.
it's
Ill
not. You don't
intention.
have ill. Yeah, you don't have ill intentions to try to match people's learning styles.
Right. You're
Everybody's
trying
trying
to
to
be helpful.
do the best by their students.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing, and I don't really know the answer to this, but okay, so people are already maybe using all three learning styles because they think that they're catering to the learners in the room. Is there any, if they don't say anything at all about why they're
Mm-hmm.
doing that, then it could be for any reason. If they're specifically saying, I'm doing this to cater to the learners in the room, is there really some negative to people believing that? Maybe, because what we talked about, then people get these self-limiting
Mm-hmm.
beliefs that that's a thing, and
Mm-hmm.
then they feel like they don't learn as well, and maybe their perception becomes the reality. So maybe I did talk myself into be uh, we shouldn't be perpetuating these myths because they could
Yeah.
potentially have negative effects. But if you don't give the reason at all, then does it really matter whether you are doing it because of the right reasons or the wrong reasons?
I think it's a really good question. And in the end, like pragmatically, I guess, as far as the way you're teaching lands with students, if you're not saying I'm teaching this way because of this, but you're just teaching, I don't
And
see
it's
how
yeah,
there
and
would be a
it's
difference.
so
Right. It's more
now
like in the realm of yoga teacher training programs and when teaching methodology is taught and the rationale behind it. I think that's kind of where it comes into play more, maybe.
yeah, and
You know?
just not perpetuating myths, even if
Yeah.
but what the ramifications are of people believing those myths. It's Is it really that deleterious?
I know,
Hard
totally.
to say.
Like how big of it's yeah. I mean, language. I feel like I think we know in movement and yoga teaching, language and narratives are kind of maybe the most powerful way that yoga teachers have potential to either negatively or positively influence people. So like it's like more like the explanations they give for why they do. But if it's something like this and they're not really giving an explanation for why demoing and verbally cueing and offering some kinesthetic stuff, then maybe it's not a big deal. But as far as their mentality goes for why they're teaching, so they know in an intentional way, I think it's better that they don't operate on myths. I just think if you want to be science-based, then understanding science is
Yeah,
better.
I mean, it goes back to like your professionalism of,
Yes, it's a great
okay,
way to put
you're
it.
operating, you might be doing the right thing for the wrong reason. Or
Yes.
if you're like, uh if you're like, well, I don't believe the research, I believe so strongly, and I've seen this work so well in my practice in terms of catering to
Right.
people's learning styles. It's like, well, you're you're operating on an
Right.
unscientific premise. That's not a very professional way of going about things.
I think that's a great professionalism really matters. Yeah, for sure. And in the end, I think we've said this before on the podcast, but a lot of times with this myth busting, it's like what you actually do in the end result doesn't like people looking at externally doesn't really need to change. It's more
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
rationale and the reasoning and the
Right.
explanation that goes behind. I feel like this is another example of that. But
Yeah.
as a community, you and me and our listeners in general, I think we're all interested in, just becoming as science-based as we can when it comes to these topics and what and why and how we're teaching. So I feel like there's an inherent value in that.
Agreed.
Yeah, well, I hope this conversation was informative and interesting. I'm curious, like of our listeners, how many of them came to this thinking and believing in the learning styles myth, since it is so widespread. Wikipedia reported like 85% or something of educators today, and it was like in 2020, believe the myth of the learning style. So it's super
Wow.
pervasive. Yeah. So I just I hope that this conversation was helpful in maybe taking a step back and thinking critically about some things that we've maybe made assumptions about that we didn't
It was
realize.
helpful for me.
Me too. Me too. Thank you so much for talking with me about this, Travis.
Thanks, Jenny.